A couple years back, I wrote an essay on terraforming Mars. It was a really interesting piece about how the only real problem with Mars and us not being able to live there now is because it's so cold there. Because the average annual temperature of Mars is equal to the South Pole in the dead of winter. So I proposed that if we were able to leak more CO2 into the air of the atmosphere of Mars, then it would gradually warm up the planet and melt the ice caps that are already there and create liquid water there. And with gas masks and some other plant matter there, that we might be able to live there eventually. Well, that's really closely related to our problem here on Earth because we're having a major global warming issue these days. Those same CO2 gases that we could use to make Mars livable is making Earth unlivable. You should listen to me because global temperatures have been rising by a fifth of a degree every decade since 1980. Because ice caps are melting slowly, and even more importantly, our water, our oceans, the sea levels are rising. Because as the global temperature increases, the water becomes more voluminous. According to the NOAA, if global temperatures will continue to rise over the next couple of years and over the next couple of decades, and water levels will continue rising and cover more parts of our continents. States like Florida will go underwater. Now, I propose that we should follow Obama's cap and trade policy to help reduce the carbon emissions here in America. First, I would like to argue that the current state of things are not working. The things that we're doing today to lower carbon emissions, and we are trying, are not effective. They're not working. They're not enough. Second, I would like to argue that Obama's cap and trade policy is the best option. Third, I will argue that taxation of carbon emissions isn't going to work. That the other viable options that we've come up with aren't strong enough. They're not going to change things. First, I would like to discuss the state of things, how we're trying to remedy our carbon usages today. Now, we have lowered emissions. In the past year, in 2011, we lowered emissions by 2%, which is significant. But we're still pumping out 5.9 billion metric tons of CO2 into the air every year. That's just here in America. We've been number one on carbon emissions for decades, and only in recent years, China's become more pollutant than we are. But it's still significant. Now, we are one of the only countries these days that have actually lowered our emissions in the past years. And I propose that we should lead by example. We should change our carbon usages today so that these other countries can follow suit. With the way things are working out now, we're poisoning ourselves. We're slowly drowning and destroying our planet. And it can't remain like this. We have to change something. Obama's cap and trade policy proposes a state of equilibrium where companies can use passes, basically, where they're granted a certain amount of carbon usages that they can use annually, and those carbon usages can be traded out from cleaner companies to less clean companies like tomato canning plants, which are using up billions of tons just by themselves. This plan works because it uses this state of equilibrium to have a bottom line where our entire country will lower emissions altogether instead of just having like we can try and lower emissions by like a percentage through every company, but this way, the companies that need more can have more if they're willing to pay for it. Third, I will argue, now that I've already discussed the state of how things are now, and I've discussed Obama's cap and trade policy, I'd like to argue that it is the best solution comparative to the other solutions that we're offering right now. According to Monica Doss, she's from the Department of Economics, she says that if we tax carbon emissions, then we can stimulate the economy and pay off our debts using the revenue from these carbon emissions. But the problem with this is it doesn't lower carbon emissions over time. It will stimulate the economy, but if a company is willing to pay more for it, then they can still have more emissions. It doesn't have the cap effect that Obama's Cap and Trade Act does, where we have that bottom line that remains the same. It works because those companies that are cleaner and they can sell their permits to the companies that use more pollutants, those companies can then be more innovative because they'll have more money to be competitive. A lot of people argue that if Obama's Cap and Trade Act goes into effect, those companies that are polluting more in America will lose enough revenue to lose our competitive edge in the market and will fall behind China and India for those companies that are using a lot of these pollutants. But that's not true, because for the cleaner companies, they get more money, which means that they can use that money to be more innovative, and our clean companies will make up for the lack of the polluting companies, basically. Now that I've discussed Obama's cap and trade policy, I've discussed the state of how things are right now, Obama's cap and trade policy, and the best rebuttal that we have right now. I strongly agree that you should support Obama's cap and trade policy to help lower carbon emissions and save our planet and to save future generations. We have to do something. We can't just go on doing nothing about this. Please help pass Obama's cap and trade policy. Thank you.